All right, everyone. It's 2 o'clock here in the East Coast, so it's time for us to go ahead and get started. I'm Dr. Sharon Milgram, and I direct the NIH Office of Intramural Training and Education. And I imagine by now that many of you have heard some of the other NIH OITE webinars that have been happening pretty regularly since the coronavirus pandemic caused many of us to head home and shelter in place. I hope all of you are well and safe. I hope that you have found ways to manage your stress and ways to be productive and ways to support yourself and your colleagues and family and friends throughout this really difficult time. If you are looking for other webinars and resources from our office, just visit our website, www.training.nih.gov. You also can just search NIH OITE on YouTube. We're doing our best to close caption all of the workshops that we're doing and then to get them up on the YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter. We're going to do our best to keep broadcasting a variety of workshops and programs throughout the coming months with the hope that we can contribute to you being productive in terms of your career development during this time. So the topic of today is maximizing mentoring relationships, but I also wanted to introduce the concept of managing up. And so this is a mashup of two workshops that I like to deliver. And my hope is that in putting them together, that I'll give you some things to think about in terms of developing a large mentoring network and not just relying on one person, but also thinking about your primary research supervisor or mentor and developing the skills to manage up or relate to him or her in ways that maximize your relationship. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just FYI, at times I've started with a picture of my dog. He is quite a barker. He has decided to have things to say during many of the workshops, so I apologize in advance if you hear a whole lot of noise. There is a PDF already uploaded into the system, but you will get another copy emailed to you probably tomorrow so that you can hold on to a copy. This will be available, same registration link if you want to watch it again, or if you want to forward it to a colleague. I get lots of emails about that, so I'll just deal with it in advance. You can share the link. You can tell colleagues about it. Absolutely no problem. Eventually, it will be closed captioned and up on the YouTube channel, but we're very, very far behind, and so that won't likely happen anytime soon. If you are interested in knowing more about what we offer, you can visit our website. There's a link to sign up for an informational listserv, NIH OITE info, and we're going to be using that moving forward throughout this period and beyond to make sure that trainees in the extramural community know about what we offer and what you can participate in. Also, on Friday, 2 days from now, is the 13th annual NIH Career Symposium. It is online. There are both some taped resources around career exploration and around the variety of careers available to individuals with a PhD in biomedical sciences. We start at noon. There are some live panels that will happen shortly after, and we will kick off at noon with some quick comments and then a brief welcoming from Dr. Francis Collins, the NIH director. Everyone is invited. We have a large capacity on our webinar system, and we hope you'll join us. So with that information, if at any time you can't hear me, My guess is it is on your end. You should just back out, quit, and rejoin. I see Maher is on the webinar. So Maher, I'm going to task you with being responsible for sending in a question in the question box if suddenly my slides aren't advancing or if you can't hear me, so that if it's on my side, I can work to fix it. If something goes crazy wrong, we've had that happen. We're using a lot of technology. It works a lot of the time, but not all of the time. If something goes wrong, I will most certainly send an email out to everyone registered. If I drop off or something goes wrong, with a time to reschedule, but I also will try pretty quickly to just get back on. So with that introduction, I'll go ahead and get started. I am not going to take a lot of questions until I get towards the end, because what I've learned is that I stop, I take a lot of questions. There are things that I would have covered later in the talk, and we run out of time and people have to pop off. So go ahead and just hold your questions until we get towards the end, because it's possible that I will answer it for you by the time we get there. All right, so I just want to start with a definition of a mentor, and this is something that I think each and every one of us in the sciences understands, and that is that a mentor is someone who advises and guides us, both personally and professionally. I think sometimes we lose sight of that definition, and we think about just science, but in general, when we are careful and thoughtful about it, we appreciate that a mentor is an individual who really invests in us as both a person and as a professional. And so what would be a really great idea is for you all to go ahead for a moment, and if you have a pen, that would be great. Think of all the things that you currently need or want mentoring about. And I want you to think broadly. I usually do this exercise in the classroom with trainees, and I get, when I first ask for a list, a pretty narrow one. Oh, help with writing papers, help with setting up experiments. So I want you to go ahead and think broadly, and I'll just pause for a moment. You'll make your list. And I'll just reflect back on past comments that people have said about what it is that they would like from their mentors. I've generalized them, but I think that this is a really nice list of the things that we need from individuals in our careers. We need someone to help us define goals, both at the outset of a training experience, the outset of a job, but also at regular intervals throughout our training. We need individuals to meet with us regularly so that we can reflect on our progress towards those goals, so that we can reset goals, modify goals based on new information. We need people to coach us as we take on new challenges, new techniques, develop new skills. And if they can't coach us in that area, we need them to kindly guide us to other coaches. We need someone who will talk to us about our career goals, how they're evolving and developing, and eventually not only just about our goals, but really in some detail about our job search and job search strategies. We need someone to discuss personal issues and how those personal issues are impacting us and our work, someone to listen to us and our ideas, whether that be about our science, about a professional opportunity, about something going on in our personal life that we want to strategize about. We need someone to provide constructive and timely feedback on our work, on our skill development, on our interpersonal skills. We need someone to provide support when we're struggling. And I mean, right now, I think we're all in a time where we acknowledge that we're struggling. But the honest truth is that even before the coronavirus pandemic, science is hard, and we would hit bumps. We all hit bumps. So we all struggle at times. We need someone to support our growth through training opportunities, through professional development, through encouraging us to apply for things, through helping us apply for them. We need someone to introduce us to colleagues because we have to begin to develop a network of our own. We need someone to promote and acknowledge our contribution to the research. That can be through authorship on a publication, presentation at a meeting, through acknowledging our work when they present our work, and through sponsorship or encouraging others to invite us to talk about our own work or to serve on some type of panel or committee. So we need a lot of different mentoring functions. Now, as I said, we need mentoring about our work. We also need mentoring about our personal life. And I'm going to add a third one right now. We really need mentoring focused in 3 spheres: science, career, and personal or psychosocial and emotional. So we need mentoring in a variety of spheres. And if you think about it, the same person could offer mentoring in all of these areas, or you could have a whole team of mentors, some of which predominantly focus in one area over another. And I'm going to talk a lot later about the concept of having multiple mentors, with the goal that if you take one message home from this webinar today, that it is that you need an entire team of mentors or an entire mentoring network. That's really the key take-home message, or one of the key take-home messages. And if you look at that list and think through things, actually I alluded to 3 different types of activities: mentoring activities, coaching activities, and advocacy activities. And so I want to make sure you understand all of those, what I mean by those. And I also want to put that within context of who your PI is, all right? Because I know that a lot of times people use the word PI interchangeably with mentor. So first and foremost, when we say PI, we mean supervisor, the person responsible for making sure work gets done within a research group or unit. We also mean mentor. Like I said, that's someone responsible for broadly developing and supporting the personal and professional development of an individual. I also mean coach. PIs act as coaches. They teach individuals specific skills that are important for advancing work or career goals, right? They coach around specific skill sets. And then finally, PIs at times are advocates. They speak up on behalf of an individual's career advancement. What you want is to get access to all of these different parts of the relationship with your PI, right? And if your PI is not a good mentor or a good coach or a good advocate in some area, to fill that gap proactively on your own, and or hopefully with their support. Just want to make sure we really fully understand this. So supervising, the focus of learning is on the needs of the group. It's like a directive style of I tell you, you do it, or I tell you how, you follow my instructions. And the balance of power is that the supervisor has much more power, right? Now, when you think about mentoring, the focus of learning is on the needs of the mentee, right? The goal is to develop the career and science and personal needs of the mentee. So the focus is really on you. And the style of help is collaborative. It's we talk, we discuss, you consider, you decide, right? With my input, but really, this is your life, your choice, your career. And therefore, the balance of power is much more equal and fluid. All right, so supervisors, when you're wearing your supervisor hat, you're really driving agendas in some manner. But when you're wearing your mentoring hat, you're really trying to pull information out of your mentee. You're really trying to support them in learning on their own. Now, I also want to make sure you understand what advocacy or having an advocate is. So in a mentoring relationship, the focus is on learning, right? Learning and developing the mentee. In an advocacy relationship, the focus of the relationship is on promotion. I am advocating for this individual to promote them within the workspace, right? That means I'm trying to get them an opportunity. I get a phone call about serving on a panel discussion at a national meeting, and I say, you know, I have this great trainee in my lab who could do that instead. So I'm promoting your career. In mentoring, the career stage of the principal involved is generally variable. So you can have a peer mentor. The honest truth is that I often feel that I am receiving mentorship from people who are earlier in their career than I am. And you can get mentorship from someone more senior than you. So it's peer mentors, more senior mentors. You can even be mentored by people at earlier career stages. Generally, when we think about advocacy, we think that the person doing the advocating on behalf of someone is more advanced in their career. So it's more senior people advocating for more junior people. And mentoring happens in private, right? We sit in a room or in 2 rooms across a computer screen these days, right? Mentoring continues to happen during this time, but it's in private. There can be small group mentoring, but generally we want to focus on the mentee and really give them all of our attention. Advocacy is in public. It's me saying, you should ask him. She would be really great for this. I can't do this, but I really encourage you to ask so-and-so. And so advocating is a way that senior individuals promote the careers of more junior individuals. Now, if you think about it, in research and in many other work environments, one supervisor, and we'll use PI for that, typically serves as coach, as mentor, as advocate, all wrapped up in one individual. Right? So one person is your boss, they're your coach, mentor, advocate, like a one-stop shop. And perhaps there are some benefits to this approach. It's certainly been the model in science for a very, very long time. And I will for a moment discuss some benefits. But there are also some risks. And I think that we need to talk about the risks in order to maximize our relationships. When I talk to PIs, I use the exact same slides as when I talk to trainees. And I say, there's just some role tensions or risks involved in this. So before I go on to those, let me just point out a benefit. If this is going well, if you have an outstanding relationship with your PI, then they know you well. When it comes time to write a letter of recommendation, they can give a really nuanced, in-depth letter. When it comes time to advocate, they can speak from a real position of experience. They can roll up their sleeves and really be engaged in your development. So I suppose when the system works, the benefit is it saves time. Someone knows you really, really well. It's very convenient. That said, go back to that long list I put up at the beginning and think about what you need mentoring in, right? It is highly unlikely that any one person can be everything for anyone, that any of us are like the Superman and Superwoman of mentoring and can do all of that. Furthermore, mentoring takes a lot of time, so we can't always be available. So there are benefits of rolling all of these functions into one, but there are some pretty dramatic risks. And so I would advocate that even if you say, my PI does this in an amazing way, I would say you still need a whole team of mentors for a variety of reasons. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But first, I want to talk a little bit about some of the risks. So the first risk is that you might not feel safe disclosing to the boss. Right? I mean, after all, the boss is the person who often controls your ability to get paid, to stay in your appointment, what projects, what meetings you get to go to. Somebody has a fair amount of power over your ability to succeed within the workspace. And sometimes in a mentoring relationship, we have to disclose something we're really struggling with. And I always like to give the example of when students would say to me, I'm at home writing. Right? I'm working on my thesis proposal, I'm working on a paper, I'm working on the review we talked about, I'm at home writing. And I used to just say, okay, great, right? But sometimes they were really struggling. They didn't feel safe telling me that. So who's going to necessarily email the person in power and say, hey, the honest truth is I'm procrastinating a lot. I've binge watched a whole bunch of TV. I've cleaned my closet. I ran twice today and I'm really trying to write, but I'm stuck. Right? So now when somebody says I'm at home writing, I say, great, reach out if you're stuck or if you want to talk about anything, just to be a little bit more open. But the honest truth is that often we don't feel safe disclosing to the boss. When it comes to looking for a job, maybe we don't want to tell our boss that we're looking right now or thinking about looking. So there's an issue of safety. So there's a conflict of interest between the boss role and the mentor role. Another reason why there's risk is that sometimes communication and conflict and work style differences lead to a lot of frustrations and misunderstandings. And when we're talking with someone in a mentoring role, we want to feel comfortable, not stressed. And so maybe our PI is a fine science mentor, and it's a fine place for us to be doing some research, but it's not really an optimal place for us to get mentoring about our career and about how we're moving within the scientific space. The other thing is that your needs and your PI's needs are not always fully aligned. So let's say I am a tenure track investigator and coming up for tenure soon, or I'm at NIH and my board of scientific counselor review is happening, or I'm in the extramural space and I have a grant due and I just need the paper submitted. You need to learn how to write. So you need some time and some coaching and opportunity to learn how to write. And I really just need this paper submitted. Yes, the paper is good, submitting the paper is good for you as well, but it needs to be a learning opportunity for you. And for me, it just needs to be a paper submitted. So every once in a while, your needs and your PI's needs are perfectly aligned. And sometimes they're partially aligned, and sometimes they're not aligned very well at all. And so there's a tension between the mentoring function and the boss supervisor function. Another reason why there's risk is that it takes an awful lot of time to mentor someone well. It takes a lot of time to supervise someone's science, and time constraints often limit the quality of mentoring interactions. And if we only have 30 minutes together and we get lost in the data, and then you're wanting to discuss your career development and your PI says, oh, I'm sorry, I got to go on to my next meeting, you just lost out on quality mentoring. So time constraints put a big risk on relying on just one person. Another reason why there's risk is that your PI may lack, or you may think that she or he lacks expertise in an area relevant to you. So a PhD scientist mentoring a postbac who's interested in going to nursing school or medical school or social work school. We lack the expertise perhaps to do that. I had some computational biology students who worked in my lab at UNC, and I really needed them to do the research I wanted to do, and I think they really appreciated that they could get a view of biology working in my lab and a really interesting clinical problem to tackle with their computational skills. I didn't have a whole lot of expertise in mentoring someone in the realm of computational biology. So I lacked the expertise necessary to be a stellar mentor in some areas. And then finally, I think it's important that we acknowledge that people go into science for a variety of reasons. And some of us go into science because we love science and want to mentor. Some of us go into science because we love science and we don't place as high a value on our mentoring role. So if you happen to be in one of those research groups where the individual you work for values the science and will engage with you around science, but doesn't place a high value on some of those other roles, then you're really at risk. So these are some of the main reasons why I think it's important for us to have really honest conversations about the fact that we tend to use the word PI and mentor interchangeably, and that we shouldn't. That all things being equal, we really wish and hope that your PI is an outstanding mentor for you, but that they may have some gaps in their mentoring skills and abilities. There may be areas where they're not as good a mentor, and then it behooves both you and them to think of strategies to mitigate that risk. So I'm going to talk to you about the strategies that I think that trainees can take in all of this. And I'll tell you that when I talk to PIs, I just flip this a little bit, right? And I encourage them to help the trainees in their lab find other mentors and deal with mitigate these strategies. I also will say, so now I don't run a lab anymore, and I run a big office, and the staff in my office need mentoring. So I am still mentoring, even though I'm mentoring in a really different sphere, a different space. And I view it as my responsibility to help them mitigate the risk, but they share that responsibility. So each of you as a trainee, as a grad student or a postdoc, you need to think about how to develop your mentoring network to mitigate this risk, right? And then hopefully your PI is thinking about the same things. So I'm going to talk about 3 strategies pretty quickly, each of them, but I'm going to tackle all 3. And the first is to choose your PI wisely and not based only on science. The second is to cultivate relationships with multiple mentors outside of your research group. And the third is to learn how to talk with your PI about your goals, your wants, and your needs so that you can maximize the relationship that you have with them. So the first is to choose your PI wisely and not based only on science. And I talk about this a lot in maybe 6 or 7 slides when I talk to first-year graduate students or when I talk to our NIH postbacks who are leaving and going off to graduate school, but I'm going to do it quickly today and just point out that there's really a process. The process isn't, am I excited about this science? Do they publish good papers? Good, I'm done. The process really is that you think deeply about yourself and your goals and how you work and what kind of environment is best for you. You think about your options. You consider both science and the environment. You interview people, you rotate, you do your research, meaning you reach out to people who were in their group before, people currently in their group, and you get input about both their science and the environment in their group, the way they manage people, mentor people, how they motivate people, how they deal with conflict. You weigh all of this, not just the science, you consider your options, and eventually you choose a research group. And the honest truth is, this is just an iterative process, because once you join a group, you have to thrive in that group. And that involves, again, knowing yourself and knowing your options. For those of you who have heard me talk about careers, you've seen something that looks just like this, because I say, as we're trying to decide what career is right for us, we have to know ourselves and know our options. And it's the same thing. We might take a volunteer opportunity to try something on. We do informational interviews and talk to people about it. We consider our options. We put together job materials, etc. So this is a sort of, to me, a foundational part of how we are successful within the workspace, the science space, is by knowing ourselves and knowing our options and trying to put them together in an effective way. So for those of you who are either getting set to start grad school or in your first year and still rotating, or close toward the end and considering a postdoc, someone considering changing labs in some way, I want to refer you to a more in-depth document about finding good research homes. It's the Mentoring Matters website off of the website that I talked about earlier, training.nih.gov. It has a great video and a set of questions for you to ask yourself, guide to talking with PIs. The goal is really to push you to go beyond the science. Data shows that people who leave labs unhappily leave labs largely because of relationship issues. And scientists have pretty broad curiosities. I don't think there's only one place where we can work and be successful. And so I really encourage you, for those of you thinking or facing a lab change at any time soon because you're changing career, you're changing training levels or rotating for whatever reason, I really encourage you to let go of the idea that we decide based on the science. We really decide based on the environment and make sure that it's an exciting place for us to do science as well. So that's general strategy 1. General strategy 2 is to cultivate relationships with multiple mentors outside of your research group. And I just cannot stress enough how important this is. So like I said, over time, we need mentoring in many areas: scientific, professional, school, career, job search, application processes, grant application process, all kinds of things. We also need support for ourselves. We need psychosocial support and life guidance. We want to have a successful life and successful work, and we want to be able to integrate the two of them. And sometimes that means sitting down with someone we trust within the workspace and talking about how things are working or are not working. No one person can meet all of our needs or be available all of the time. And even if you think you hit the sweet spot of mentors and you don't need other people, appreciate that eventually you will need multiple letters of recommendation for different things. Appreciate that that multiple perspectives drive creative solutions, and we really all put ourselves at risk if we don't expand our mentoring network by having multiple mentors. Bad things happen to people, and as we're really seeing right now. And so we never want to rely exclusively on one person. So we need to find outside mentors. And I like to encourage people to do that by asking themselves 4 questions. One is at the outset, and the other 3 are during the process. And the first is, what am I looking for guidance about? Does this person, who I'm thinking about, who has the expertise or access to expertise that I need? If I am interested in mentorship around pursuing industry careers, I want to talk to somebody who has expertise in that area, or access to expertise. So I've never worked in industry, but I have lots of students who have, colleagues who have collaborated with people in industry. So I have access to expertise. So it doesn't have to be that they're an expert, but they have to have access to expertise and they have to want to share it. So you think, what am I looking for? Who might be able to offer that? All right. And then you'll reach out, you'll engage, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then over time, you'll want to know or ask yourself, do we connect? Is it a generally comfortable relationship? Do I get the right balance of positive input and hard questions? And do they make time for me? Mentorship is not all about just hearing the positive. It's someone who gives you a lot of positive feedback and helps you see the positive in your accomplishments. They come at your development from this positive approach, but they also help you see your gaps. They help you accept that you have to work on them. They help you grapple with them when it's really painful. Sometimes but the thing that's least fun in our career is facing our gaps and doing something about it, right? So they are sometimes really there to give you a high five or a hug, and they're sometimes there to give you a gentle nudge or a kick in the pants. And so as you're engaging with people and developing mentoring relationships, you want to pay attention to that relationship challenges you, that relationship also supports and nurtures you. And that they're not going to always be available, but they make an effort, especially when you say, I really feel pressed right now and would love to talk. But it starts with the question of, what am I looking for guidance about, and who has the ability to give me that guidance or access to experts who can give me that guidance. As we're thinking about building our mentoring network, I think we often, especially as we think about ourselves as individuals, we look for people with shared life and work experiences and shared identities. And I think that that can be incredibly helpful. But if we limited ourselves there, we would lose out on many successful mentor-mentee relationships. What we want is somebody humble enough to understand where we're coming from, humble enough to ask questions about our experience, willing to own when they need to learn a little bit about where we're coming from. But that doesn't always mean that they share our life experience, work experience, or identities. Still worth looking for and keeping in mind, and without a doubt, a really comforting thing. I know at times I've really enjoyed having some really great female mentors. When I was starting to go on the job market, I really wanted to speak to somebody else who was out and gay so that I could talk a little bit about how that might work as I was interviewing for director type positions. So I really valued that shared identity at times, but many of my mentors have not shared life experiences or identities, and they have been outstanding mentors. Developing your networking and communication skills are the first step to finding mentors. People always say, so how do I do this, right? And I want to start by saying we do it by developing our networking and communication skills, and we do it by taking advantage of the resources available to us at our institution, okay? And those of you who've heard my resilience talk, of my assertiveness and feedback talks, you've heard me talk many times about how important institutional resources are. So if an institution, if the postdoc office at your university or the grad school at your university or the SACNAS chapter or any group hosts an event and they invite people, they are offering you insight into potential mentors, right? At NIH, people who come to the OITE to talk about their career development are essentially interviewing potential mentors, right? When you go to a scientific society national meeting and they have a career cafe, they are offering you potential mentors. So using those resources can jumpstart the process, because if we said, yes, I'll go to that career cafe, or yes, I'll accept your invitation to speak at this workshop that you're offering, by definition, it means we care about the students and postdocs in that room. So using institutional resources gives you insight into really valuable potential networks of mentors. And so I thought we should talk about the word networking, because sometimes people think it's a four-letter word and it's about running around and getting business cards or collecting the most LinkedIn links you can find. I want you to think about networking. It's fine, think about it that way as well if you enjoy that, and if it can be very effective, right? Networking online can be very effective, and meeting lots of people does give you the chance of connecting with people. So think about it that way, but also think about it in this way: the development and cultivation of professional relationships. It's not how many people, it's getting to know the right people in the right level. So let's say you have networked at the end of a workshop, or you join in on Friday at the career symposium and there's someone on a panel and they're talking and it really resonates and you think, damn, there's no way to network with them. Well, actually there is. You can email them right afterward, right? I was on the panel, I watched the panel discussion, and I was really struck by these things you said, and I'd love to talk with you. You meet somebody at your poster at a national meeting, or your virtual poster right now, and they ask some good questions, and you think, that would be a really good person for me to discuss something with. That's a potential mentor. You have a class with someone, and the teacher really resonates, and you think there's a mentor. For however that first interaction was, if you think, this person has some information that could be valuable for me, you email them a really kind first short email asking for a meeting, Go prepared to summarize who you are and what your needs are, and go also a little bit knowledgeable about them and their interests. So take a minute to look at their website. If it's a scientist and you want to talk about work, make sure you know a little bit about their work, read their latest paper. If you want some information, say you want to network with people doing science policy, you really need some career mentorship, go to their website, find a bio if you can, understand their career trajectory, know a little bit about them. Mentoring is not a one-way street. It's not some senior person offering guidance and support. It's back and forth. You need to know them, they need to know you. It's an exchange. So make sure that you are prepared to talk about you and your needs, but also be knowledgeable about them and their interests. A lot of times I find when I meet with people in a mentoring interaction, it's really helpful if they bring materials. So if they want to talk about their interest in entering the science educational field, if they bring me a resume or something that highlights some of their experiences, it's really helpful. In the lab, people used to come a lot for some mentorship and sometimes coaching beyond just a discussion about proteomics, about protein-protein interactions, and it helped when they brought a couple of key figures. So it might be that you should bring some materials. In fact, I would say for the most part, bring materials. You should be prepared to talk, but you should also listen. So you want to have some questions, but you also want to slow down and listen. Sometimes I find people get nervous, and in their nervousness, they want to fill every moment, and then there's not much of a mentoring interaction or exchange. It's really just focused on them talking. You should plan on getting about 30 minutes of someone's time, not a whole lot more than that, but you might get more, right? So they may be engaged in the conversation and it's still going at 40 minutes, and just enjoy it, right? If they're available and you still have questions, enjoy the focus on you and your needs and your curiosities about what they have to offer. You should follow up after the meeting with an email thanking them. If you think a follow-up might be helpful, you can ask, would you be willing to meet with me again? If this is a regular mentoring relationship, you might schedule a follow-up right away. But sometimes not. You got something out of it, and you may or may not need a follow-up later. But if you do, you'll want to schedule or ask about that follow-up by email. Remember that mentoring relationships develop over time, but short-term mentoring can also make a difference. In the career realm, in some ways, I think of short-term career mentoring as doing an informational interview. You go and talk with someone about their career and get advice so that you can learn about that career path. Sometimes you meet with someone one time and it was incredibly important mentoring, right? They gave you some advice and input. They helped you think about something a little bit differently. They prompted you to do something you were nervous about doing. So sometimes a one-time shot is a really, really helpful mentoring relationship. But sometimes we want to develop mentoring relationships over time. That's when you go back to those questions. Did we connect? Does it feel comfortable? Can I be who I am? Can I be vulnerable and share my concerns with this person? Did I have a sense that I'm going to get both positive input, but also some push and hard questions? And were they really available in the moment? So as a mentoring relationship develops over time, you'll want to be asking yourself those 4 questions. Virtual mentoring can be very, very effective. That can be because the person you want to ask is remote. That can be for a variety of reasons. You want to expand your network and you're at a small institution. The National Research Mentoring Network, or Norman, is a great platform for virtual mentoring. Many scientific societies have virtual mentoring programs. It can be incredibly effective. And then I want to just stress one thing, that we need mentors throughout our careers, not just during our training. There is a transition, right, from one type of mentors to another. People talk about lifelong mentoring relationships, and I think that that's a really beautiful thing to talk about. I think in reality, it happens less often than we imagine. You know, I care a lot about people who are in my lab. I started my lab in 1994, and I had a large cohort of graduate students right then at the start. And I'm still in touch with them, but it's pretty infrequent. But when they need mentoring, they can reach back out. And they have, as they were making career transitions, thinking about things. When I was thinking about taking on the NIH job, I reached out to my thesis advisor because he had become a dean. And I thought, oh, there's some similarities, right? He ran a lab and then he became a dean, and I'm running a lab now, and I'm thinking of directing this office. So we need mentors throughout our careers. Sometimes we reach way back to people who mentored us before, and sometimes we find new ones on the way. And so I want to summarize this unit because I think it is so key, by stressing that we all need multiple mentors, and we cannot rely exclusively on the PI of our research group. I hope that the PI of your group is a great mentor for you. I hope that they mentor you in the career sphere, in the personal sphere, in the science sphere, but we all need multiple mentors. It is impossible to find the full range of what we need in one person, and some PIs do not feel that some aspects of mentoring are important. So we need people to mentor us who know our field, who know career paths that interest us, who know how things work at our institution, who inspire us and have personal attributes we admire. We need a whole set of mentors, and it is our right to have multiple mentors, but it is also our responsibility to work to find them. It is, while I think the best of PIs make an intentional effort to expand your mentoring network by encouraging you to talk with seminar speakers, by introducing you to colleagues, by emailing maybe people on your behalf occasionally, so advocating for you. The best of PIs will help you develop your network, but ultimately the responsibility for this rests on you. So I want you to pull up the slides later and go to this page. This is your mentoring network checkup or tune-up, thinking about a car. You know, we have to tune it up now and again. So what do you need mentoring about right now? Beyond your PI, who are your current mentors? What are some important sources of mentorship you have not explored yet, or you haven't explored hard enough yet? And what is one thing you can do now to expand your mentoring community or mentoring network? And if there are some people here who are on the call who are PIs, because that's happened in the past, ask this question. If you're a grad student or a postdoc who is a supervisor of others in your research group, how will you help your students find and develop relationships with multiple mentors? So that's second strategy. The third strategy, in terms of getting the mentoring you need from your primary research supervisor or PI, is to learn how to talk with them about your goals, your wants, and your needs. And so to start, you need to understand first and foremost that you have the right to be mentored and the right to a safe training environment. All those things listed, that's what you need to be successful at the beginning. That's what you need to be successful in the long term. And so while you have responsibilities to your group, you also have rights. And one of those rights is to be mentored in a respectful way. You have to develop your assertiveness and negotiation skills to talk with your PI about areas of mentorship if it's not working out well for you. And you also have to understand how your own head tapes or cognitive distortions and stress response influence your ability to talk with your PI. And I'll be giving you links to old videos for those of you who didn't hear me talk about cognitive distortions and the impact of stress on our assertiveness and our communication skills. You'll want to watch some of those videos. You'll then want to be able to talk to your PI about those role tensions, and you want a process that helps you explore your perspective, but also your mentor's perspective. You'll want to think through some long and short-term impacts of decisions that are made. And you want to think about deadlines and factors impacting the situation, right? And so you want a way of thinking about this from your perspective and then getting up, switching chairs, and seeing it from your PI's perspective. All right. That, and when I talked about emotional intelligence, I talked about having empathy as being one of the emotional intelligence competencies. That this is an example of where you would use that competency. So let's say I'm getting close to the end of my graduate work and I really want to spend 3 months doing an internship in a tech transfer or science policy office. I'm thinking of exploring that career. Everyone that I have talked to, all the career mentors that I've talked to have said you really need some hands-on experience in an office, and the end of grad school feels like a good time for you to do that. So think about it from your perspective. But then think about, well, what might my mentor think about that? Maybe the timing is bad because I didn't finish my paper, or the timing is bad because we have a grant due, right? What are the potential long-term impacts? What are the potential short-term impacts if I do this and I don't finish the paper and then I move on? Long-term, the paper may never get published, right? So you need to think about the impacts. When I mean by deadlines and factors impacting the situation is it might be that someone would say, yes, you could do that internship, but could you wait until August instead of June? So sometimes a deadline of some sort impacts the timing of a decision or how the decision is made. So you want to think about all of that. And then you want to think through the conversation, think about questions they might ask you, think about how you'll answer them, think about what kinds of compromises you might make. I talked about a lot of this in the assertiveness and feedback workshops, and so I won't go into it in depth. And then you want to get some support from your postdoc office, grad program director, someone on your thesis committee, right? That's a great source of mentorship in regards to how to navigate things with your PI. So you want to get some support, you want to practice, and then you eventually want to have the conversation. Here are the 2 talks that I was referring to, the self-advocacy for scientists and developing feedback resilience, which will help you with thinking about talking with your PI. So that's what I want to say about the role tension and about multiple mentors. And now I want to transition a little bit beyond sort of broad big picture about the types of mentorship you need. And I want to talk about enhancing relationships with your PI. It's a perfect segue from that third strategy to mitigate the role tension. And so what I want to talk about are the principles of managing up. All right. So managing up is knowing your manager's style and adjusting your own so that you can work effectively together. It's figuring out your manager, flexing your behaviors towards your manager's behaviors, right? So that it helps you work more effectively together. It is not being someone completely different than you are. It's being aware of who your manager is and adjusting to that in some way. I want to start this part of the discussion with some general rules about managing up. And remember, I said one of the big risks to why our PI is not always a good mentor for us in some areas is that there are differences in our work and communication and conflict style. This is a big area where we can manage up by paying attention to our PI's feedback style, communication style, work style, and accepting it and adjusting a little bit. Tensions arise when 2 people have very different styles, but they also arise when people have very similar styles. And we talked a lot about that in the feedback session, and I gave you the link to that. And the problem is, and this is hard all the time, but when people are under stress, it's even worse. So when you're stressed, or your boss is stressed, or the whole group is stressed, or the entire university is stressed, like right now, man, it makes these tensions come up faster and stronger. So we really need to be aware of our work style and other people's work styles and communication styles. And we really need to practice our emotional intelligence skills so that we can work effectively together, even though our styles are very different. To get the most out of your PI, you will spend some time imagining that you are an anthropologist who landed in a new environment and a new culture, and you are studying the head of that culture to figure out how to do well. And I just wanted to give you some questions that you could start with. So think about, what's your PI's preferred way to communicate? I hate email, hate it. When people send me a long email, I don't read it. And then they wonder why I never got back to them, right? So does your PI love email? Does your PI prefer face-to-face meetings? Now, is Zoom better than the phone? Are you someone who works with someone who's happy with texting? What are their preferred ways to communicate? When are they most approachable, or when is their best meeting times? We all have a sort of ebb and flow to our day. We're morning people, we're not morning people. I have a total lull late afternoon. Everyone in my office, I think, knows to avoid me from about the hours of 2 to 4. I have a great burst of energy in the morning. And then I usually get a little bit of a second wind, but everybody has a best meeting time. I know some of my students used to tell new students rotating, come and have coffee with Sharon in the morning, right? Anytime up until about 10 o'clock, if you say, hey, can we get a coffee and talk? She'll pop up and say yes. So when is your PI most approachable? Sometimes our PI's time is really not in sync with our time, right? So our PI is a super early morning person and we are not, or we have to get the kids to daycare, we have other responsibilities. So sometimes we can't totally flex to their best meeting time, but sometimes we can. And if you can, it's worth being aware of the best times. Also ask yourself, what is my PI's need for proactive FaceTime? Some PIs really want to see people around and they want you to pop in and share data, and it's important to them. And when you don't, you're poking at them a little bit, and you might have a better relationship for being proactive in providing some FaceTime. Also, what's their need for social interaction, right? If they have lunch and they value people sitting around the table while they have lunch and you choose not to join, one day, no big deal. You choose never to join, and you're missing an opportunity to engage them at a time when they're open and available. What's their need for written summaries and planning documents? Some people really need them. Some people don't like them at all, right? I like written summaries after a meeting, and I like them to be short and bulleted. Some people like when you walk in with a planning document and then you submit a long written summary afterward. So what makes them tick in all of that? What is their desire for details in communications? Do they want you to sit down and jump right into the details, or are they a big picture person and they'll stay away from the details? What details tend to matter to them? So that's another thing for you to think about. What are their hot buttons and things that irritate them? We all have hot buttons. Hot buttons are irritations that we respond to disproportionately. So I have a hot button around time, which is sort of ironic because I keep people waiting a lot. But when staff meeting starts late or lab meeting starts late, or we used to say, oh, we'll practice our posters at 3. If people were there at 3:15, boy, my hot button was pushed. So what are your PI's hot buttons? And then finally, what is their interest or ability to provide the types of guidance that you want or need? These are just some questions to help you get insight into the person who you are working with and for. The more we understand that person and the more we understand ourselves and the more we look for places where we can flex a little bit, the better off we will be. And then we're managing up effectively. There are a whole bunch of areas where work styles can be really different. I alluded to a lot of these in the last slide, so I won't talk about a lot of them right now, but these can really get in the way of getting the mentoring that we need from people. quite frankly, they can get in the way of being happy working in that environment. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end, right? So these are all things about us that have developed through both nature and nurture, all right? We've been in environments, we get messages, we watch other people, we emulate them, and then those behaviors become a part of our own private logic, or the way we see the world and the way we move in the world. And some of us love uncertainty and change, and some of us don't. And some of us are very problem focused, i.e., when we give feedback, we start right at the beginning from what isn't going right. Or when we look at what we're working on, we start with what isn't going right. Some of us are more success focused or positive focused. We start out with what went well. Let's worry about the other things later. We're all different, big picture or detailed, right? We think deadlines are totally flexible, or we think they're rigid. So some people say, I'll give it to you Monday, and they mean this Monday. And some people mean any Monday in the next month or so. So we're all different. So here's another way for you to think about your PI in each of these. We also have different communication styles. And I just put this slide in. I won't talk about it. I talked about this for 40 minutes probably in the last workshop I did. It's the feedback resilience workshop. Each of us has a different communication style. And one way of getting more out of our PI, one way of managing up, is to appreciate our PI's style and working to accommodate it a little bit. So if we work for a driver, we don't go into the meeting expecting a whole lot of warmth and discussion. We go into the meeting and say, here's my agenda, would you like to start? Or where would you like to start? All right, so we flex our style a little bit. And then remember that we all have different ways of approaching conflict, and this is the Thomas Kilmann conflict grid. And I talked about this in the leadership talk. And so you'll want to check that one out if you haven't heard about conflict styles. These are all ways that you can think about who your PI is and how they deal with things, so that A, you can be prepared, and B, so that you can flex as much as you possibly can. There's a great work style assessment that I found today when I was just looking for new material. It comes from a management consultant, Ed Batista. It's off of his website, and it goes into like 26 dimensions of difference in work styles. And I'm curious if any of you try it out, whether you thought it was helpful, send me an email. I'm actually thinking that if I did this workshop with a group of people in a room, I might actually ask them to do it and then get into small groups and discuss it. So I gave you lots of ways to think about your PI. I want to give you one other way, and this is based on the 7 major leadership styles that Dan Goleman articulated in some of his work about social intelligence. And so I just want you to think about what style your PI generally uses. Is your PI an autocrat? Do as I say, right? In which case, you're going to have to flex your style and be somewhat forceful back, or else you're always going to be told what to do, right? Are they authoritative, which is follow me towards this vision? Do they want to spend time with you discussing vision and goals and where we're heading, and then they want you to move along with them, right? In which case, you want to be sure that you have a vision, and that as they lay out their vision, you lay out your vision and find places where they overlap. Is it a pace setting style? Do as I do or say and hurry up about it, right? In which case, you need to at times be prepared to be really tired, right? Because that style we all are taught from a management perspective really burns people out, not just the leader. Actually, it can burn lots of people. It can burn people out in the group. But you're going to need to know that and adjust to it. A democratic style, what do you want to do? If you are waiting for your PI to tell you what to do and their style is democratic, i.e., hey, what do you think? You're never going to get the mentoring you want until you say, well, I have 3 ideas and I'd appreciate your input. They might be a coaching style. How about considering this? The problem with how about considering this style, the coaching style, is you don't know, are they telling you to do this? Are they suggesting you do this? Do they think it's a good idea or not? It leaves you really wondering, what the hell am I supposed to do after that meeting? And so then to flex, you're going to want to end the meeting by saying, okay, you've put out some ideas. Could you give me a sense of how you might prioritize these? Or you might say, I think I'll prioritize it this way. Do you agree? And then there's the affiliative style. That's what can I do to help you? They don't give a lot of ideas or a whole lot of direction. They are there to facilitate you figuring things out. In which case, if you're not sure what to do, you're going to need to go out of your way to find that out. Sometimes people at first start and they say, God, that autocratic style, I don't want to be on the receiving end of that. But as we talk about some of these others like coaching and affiliative and laissez-faire, they realize, well, there is something clear about and beneficial to the autocratic style. At least I know where I stand and what I should do. So affiliative is, what can I do to help you? In which case, you really, when you go into meetings, have to have an agenda. You need to drive the agenda, and you need to make it clear what you need to them. And then finally, there's another style, the laissez-faire style, and there is no sentence that would sum that up, because they're laissez-faire, hands off, leaving it up to you. In which case, you have to be proactive and go to them. And then they still might not even decide, so you're going to need to follow up with something in writing. If I don't hear from you, I'm going to do it this way. Each of these styles comes with strengths, right? There's benefits to all of these styles. Any of these styles overdone is not beneficial, right? Nobody wants an autocratic leader all the time or a pace-setting leader all the time. But if you think about it, all of these have some benefits. A pace-setting leader might be great right before a grant is due. An autocratic leader might be great if you're unsure where to go and you just want to get started on something, right? A democratic, it's great when you want to have a say, and frustrating when you would like somebody to help you narrow your options. So all of these styles have strengths. All of these styles overused are liabilities. And all of these styles can be frustrating to you if it's so far out of the style you might use, or if you use the exact same style. And so you're really, say you're both autocratic, talking over each other. I want to do it this way. No, I want to do it that way. No, I'm going to do it this way. No, I'm going to do it that way. And so knowing all of this helps us pause in the moment and think about how we might flex to the style. Now, none of these slides and me running through them is especially helpful. You really need to sit and journal a lot. All right? And you know, in many of the talks, I've talked about the benefit of journaling, and in the leadership work talk, I talked about the benefits of having a leadership journal. I suggest you sit down and you put these slides out in front of you and you spend some time writing. My PI often does, uses these styles in an argument, they do this. You know, just write about them as much as you can. And then this, I often do. I use these styles in an argument, I tend to. When I communicate, I often, right? When it comes to time, here's my beliefs. You journal about you. And then you spend some time with both of them. These don't have to be beautifully written, right? They can be bullet points, they can be short sentences, there can be a few anecdotes in there, but you read it over, you think about it, and then you think about, where do we work together well, right? When does it really work? And what are our out spots? And maybe it's working for my PI, but not working at all for me. So what does that mean? So then, considering all of this, considering the relationship I have, what are my options? Am I in a pretty good spot and I just need to tweak our relationship a little bit? Or am I in a really rough spot and I need to make some dramatic change? Mentoring, getting the mentoring you need is in part finding outside mentors, but it's in part improving the relationship with your PI to the extent possible. And so I'm going to address that issue of with your PI to the extent possible through this analogy. So if we lined every PI up right? Um, just lined them all up. I don't know how long that line would be. On one end, there are some people who are just amazing, great mentors. They've heard this workshop, they could give this workshop, they've done the hard work that they need to do to be emotionally intelligent, they've learned how to give feedback, they have figured out that sometimes they have to take their boss hat off and put their mentor hat on. They're great mentors. So maybe there are some small tweaks, but you've landed in a great spot. And then all the way, there's a continuum. Okay, there are some pretty good, okay mentors. They got pros, they got cons. It's not perfect for you, but it's pretty much okay. You're learning, you're growing, you're thriving in some ways. You shore up areas where they're not as good with outside mentors, and you're in a pretty sweet spot. And then there are those laissez-faire managers who are also laissez-faire mentors. I would consider them actually to be non-mentors, right? They might oversee work a little bit. They might be available now and again, but for the most part, you are in this on your own. And then we move towards people who are really less than quality mentors. They're really in some ways blocking your success, all the way to what I call tour mentors, or people who beat the love of science out of people, people who have no ability to control their negative emotions, who take anger and frustration out on others, people who are completely unavailable, really getting in your way. And I think that we need to be honest and just say that there is a range, right? And I wish that the range would be much narrower, right? But there are unsafe, toxic, hostile, harassing lab environments. And mentors are either laissez-faire and allow that to happen through others, or they are actually driving that or a part of that. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And depending on where you feel your mentor falls on this continuum, I think that drives some how you handle this material and what you think of in terms of managing up. And so that's what I want to address, and then I'll take questions at the end. So in reality, as you look at this, and you all, regardless of where you are in this continuum, have things you might want to change, or you might realize you need mentorship in an area you haven't considered. So everyone has to think about this. In reality, we really have four options. We can accept how something is and do nothing. We can try to change the situation or the interaction. We can try to change ourselves and our response to the situation. So we accept that we can't change it, and we decide we can change ourselves. The honest truth is, while we can try to change something, really we can never make somebody else do something they don't want to do. So often try to change ourselves needs to go hand in hand with try to change the situation. And then our fourth option is to leave the situation. And I thought I would talk about each of these a little bit. So sometimes we go through this exercise and we realize in general, we're in an okay space. We're generally happy. We're getting most of our needs met, right? So we can accept how it is and do nothing. Sometimes we're very close to the end or the end of a particular part of our experience, and we don't wish to derail progress, so we want to just accept how it is. And sometimes it's a very short-lived experience anyway. We're doing a 6-week rotation. We don't have to stay there, and so we're going to accept how it is and do nothing. If we're going to do that, we have to come to a place of letting go. Right? We have to find a way to let go of what's bothering us. We have to accept that it is what it is, right? That there's no such thing as perfect, that this is good enough, and that the issue that is poking at us isn't big enough to deal with. And then we have to practice self-care, take care of ourselves so it doesn't poke quite so much. And that's true in every situation. Whatever boss we have, and I have a really great boss right now, but there are a few things that poke at me, and I've just decided they are what they are. I have a very good support system that, so when I get really poked about it, I work it out other ways. And I guess in many ways, what I wish is that all of you are saying, here's where I am. I'm in this place where I'm generally happy and getting most of my needs met. But I know some of you aren't. So let's talk a little bit about trying to change the situation. We do this when things are generally positive, but something is a major issue for us. We like the environment, we're making progress. In many ways, our PI provides really good scientific mentorship for us, but we need something to change. Maybe the way they give feedback, maybe the fact that they don't edit our manuscripts very quickly, maybe the fact that they don't support us in going to career development workshops. We really need to try to change it. So that's one reason. Another is we really love the science, right? But we really are struggling with the environment and we really want to try to find a way to make it work. So then we have to try to change it. And the third is when we haven't yet discussed the issue with our PI. Nobody can change something without knowing what the issues are. And a lot of times people come to talk to me about mentoring issues. And when I say, well, have you ever brought this up? They say, oh, no. And in many, many ways, we have to be willing to bring it up if we want to make change. If we're going to try to change the situation, we really have to go and think about assertive communication. So we might want to go back, you might want to go back to that workshop. You might want to talk to one of your outside of lab mentors about assertive communication. You want to get advice and guidance from those mentors and from institutional support systems. And then you want to talk with your PI and other relevant parties. To try to change it means to have a hard conversation, to give feedback to someone about something that isn't working for you. There's a lot of reasons why we stop ourselves from doing that. Our cognitive distortions run wild and tell us it'll never work, we'll never get what we want, we'll get fired. There's all kinds of reasons why we stop ourselves from doing that. But if we take care of ourselves and we use support systems, we usually find that we're able to have the discussion. And maybe we don't change the situation, but what we did was grow in our assertiveness through the situation. Maybe having that conversation gives us enough data to appreciate that we're going to have to leave no matter what. Maybe it gives us the impetus to really look carefully at where we are and ask if we need to stay there. So sometimes we don't get our needs met when we have these difficult conversations, right? The other person doesn't change, or they say they'll change, but they really don't. But what we get out of that are the data that we need to make good professional decisions. Now, sometimes a situation, we've tried to change it, we weren't successful, and we come to the conclusion that we don't want to or cannot leave. We're very close to the end of our PhD, and we can't change this, and somehow we have to hold on and get through this. So we try to change ourselves and our response to the situation. The honest truth is this really goes hand in hand with all of them, but I wanted to talk about it as its own thing. That means that requires us to first be certain that we tried to change it and that staying is in our best interest. So both from a science perspective, but also a health and mental health perspective. The data in looking at mental health in the graduate student community shows us that being in a toxic environment, working with an unsupportive mentor contributes to anxiety and depression in graduate students. And I'm quite certain that that's true in other populations, although I'm not aware of data to support that. So we want to be, before we say we're going to stay anyway, no matter what, we're just going to try to change ourselves and how we respond to the situation. We want to make sure we're really going to be okay if we do that. That requires us to find support on and off campus. It requires us to practice self-care. Notice that that is an element of all of this. Scientists don't do a good job of taking care of themselves. And if we did, I think we'd be able to handle some of these stressful mentoring situations better. Not to say the onus is on you. The honest truth is the onus is on science to change. We have to require mentors. We have to select faculty members who care about mentoring. We have to provide them with the resources they need to develop their mentoring tools. We have to reward good mentoring. The system has to change as well. But you also have to take care of yourself within the system. And one way to change our response to a situation is to engage with support systems, to practice taking care of ourselves. Self-care is about healthy boundaries. And so we also have to take that responsibility on ourselves. And then I'm going to end by talking about leaving the situation. And people often say, really? But I don't know. I've been doing this work for a long time. I don't know how many. I mean, I started doing graduate and postdoc education when I was at UNC, and now I've been at NIH like 13 years. So I've been doing this like 20 plus years. Man, sometimes people say to me, I could never leave. And then they leave, and I bump into them like 6 months later or 3 months later, and they are beaming, and they found their love of science again. So sometimes we leave because we realize the situation is beating the love of science out of us. Sometimes we realize that goes hand in hand with the fact that staying is impacting our mental and physical health. And sometimes we choose to leave because we're just starting out and we have other options. We have something invested, but not so much invested. Sometimes we make this mistake of thinking, well, we've invested something, so we don't want to lose that. But what we really need to do is project to the future and say, how long might this go on? And so is a year really a lot of time in a 5-year training experience? And sometimes we don't have the opportunity to leave a situation, so we have to revisit the option of trying to change it and trying to change our response. But sometimes as students and postdocs think through things, they realize that they do have the possibility of trying to move on. If we're going to leave, this is a big decision. So we want to first make an effort to improve the situation. We want to carefully think through our options and our approaches forward. And we want to engage all of the important institutional resources available to us. And I'm sorry I didn't finish this slide. Grad program directors, deans, department chairs, advisors in the Division of International Services for visiting fellows, people on our thesis committee, people within at NIH, the branch chief or others within the branch who might be able to help us, training directors, etc. We have to, before we decide to do this, we really need to seek safety. And I talked a lot about that in the feedback and assertiveness workshop. So what to do next really depends on our general relationship, our satisfaction level in the group, the investment we've already made, what our options are. And we want to find resources and use all of them as we work through our options. And I think that I want to end by stressing that one thing that I think is especially important is to deal with all the emotionally draining aspects of not getting the mentoring you need. And so I want to encourage you to be open to counseling services on your campus and outside of campus, support groups, the resilience discussion groups for those of you at NIH. One of the reasons they're there is for you to get support when you're facing difficulties in mentoring relationships. I think there's no one way to talk about mentoring without acknowledging just the range of different experiences that you are all having. Some of you having these amazing mentoring situations, and some of you really, really struggling. And so I hope that I did both and provided resources for you regardless of where in that spectrum. But for one moment, I do want to say, if you find yourself, if you're sitting in this talk and you have a pit in your stomach and you say, I am working for a tour mentor and I have tried to change it and they are beating the love of science out of me and I feel lousy, then I really encourage you to reach out to someone at your institution that you trust. If that's NIH, please reach out to me. If you're somewhere else, think about who is it that you can trust in your graduate program, postdoc, office, department, etc., because there are people heavily, heavily vested in your success. I mentioned a lot of different resources and workshops, so I wanted to give you the links. Some of these are up on our YouTube channel. Some of these are still within GoToWebinar. So you register and then you get access to it. We have not figured out a way to get all the handouts up there yet. So if you want the slides and you don't have them, please, just send me an email. So I just want to end before I take questions by making the point that none of us are great bosses all of the time, and none of us are great mentors all the time. There is a tremendous amount of role tension between our needs and your needs at times. There's a lot on the plate of each and every PI out there. They're juggling all kinds of things. They too are stressed through this entire situation. So none of us are great bosses all the time. Very few, probably none of us went into science to manage people. We went into science because we love science, and few scientists are well trained in this area. You, by being here, and you, by watching all those other videos and by participating in workshops on your campus, you are the generation that's going to change this by getting training. So thank you for that. So we all need to be able to shrug it off, forgive and forget the small things, but we also need to work in an environment that lets us grow and learn. We need to feel seen, valued, and heard for who we are. And I hope that you all can work hard to make that happen. I hope that your institutions work hard with you to make that happen. And I want to end as I take questions with this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. Generally, I love abstract art. Not so much representational art, but this is a photograph from one of my favorite artists, Yves Klein. He made this in 1960, right? So this is not photoshopped, right? This is not done on a computer. It's called Jumping into the Void. And I think graduate students and postdocs jump into the void every day. Science is jumping into a big void, right? Of discovery, but also of this feeling of, is there going to be somebody there to help? And so I like to think about this as jumping into the void with the help of mentors. So with that, I am going to go ahead and start with questions. All right, and I will take as many questions as I can. So the first one is it okay to have mentors that are just professional and other mentors who are just personal? It absolutely is. You get to define the purpose of a mentoring relationship, but in general, you'll find that people spread a little bit, right? That somebody might be predominantly a career mentor, but they might weigh in because your career and your life and your science are all intertwined. So they'll weigh in on all of them. There was some things about hearing. I hope that worked out. Can we invite people outside of the NIH to the Career Symposium? Everyone is invited to the Career Symposium. I have been advertising it on social media. Please continue advertising it on social media. Thank you. I find it hard to know the facts about the lab environment before joining a lab. What would be the best way to find that out in advance? So if you're a grad student and you get to rotate, you can find some of it out during the rotation, but it's really best to do some homework in advance. And in that document that I alluded to is a list of questions. I find that one of the best things that you can do is reach out to alumni, right? You can ask the PI, where have all your previous graduate students ended up, or where have postdocs ended up? They should be willing to share those names. They should be willing to talk about them. If they say they talk about 2 and then you go look at their publications or their lab page, it's clear they had many, many more. You might want to try to find out why that is, that you only got a small number to talk with. I find that sometimes people in the lab at that time are pretty stressed themselves, and it's hard for them to say, no, don't come. This is not a supportive environment. So you need to ask really precise and clear questions. Tell me about when there's an argument here, what happens? Tell me about how your PI helps people resolve issues. How often do you meet with your PI? Do you get to do projects and give ideas? You want to ask as specific questions as you can so that people will hopefully be as honest as they can. It has been a while since I talked to my past PI and I want to maintain the relationship. How can I reach back after a long time of silence? That's a great question, Hannah. About a month ago, I opened the email and I saw an email from someone named Li Hong Chen, who was a graduate student of mine, and he finished in like 1998. We kept in touch for a while, and then for whatever reason, I hadn't heard from him for a long time. My face lit up. I couldn't wait to read the email. I couldn't wait to respond to the email. Just reach out. He didn't send a really long, in-depth email because he probably knows from managing up that I don't read long, in-depth emails. He sent me a nice short summary. He attached a picture of him and his family, which made me really happy. I responded back. We talked about whether we might overlap at a meeting at some point or whether he would be in DC for some reason. Just reach out. Appreciate that you might not hear back, but you very well might. The best way to reestablish connection is that way. So it seems like it was pouring rain here, so maybe there were some audio problems. Hopefully the tape will be okay. Are there other I made the mistake of staying with a pace-setting mentor in a very toxic environment, and that beat the love of science out of me. I am in a new environment. I have better support system, but giving a year, I'm not finding the love. Yeah, thank you. That's a really vulnerable observation to put out there. So I have two things to say about that. When I advise people who are changing labs because they were in a toxic environment, I actually beg, not encourage, but beg them to consider finding a counselor and talking through the experience. I feel like the toxic environment is a massive, heavy bag of rocks, and you carry it with you from the first lab to the second lab. So if the love is not coming back and you're really burned out and you're really crushed by the experience, I would encourage you to find a therapist to talk with. If you're a graduate student and you have access to student health, that might be a good place to start. If you are a postdoc and there's an employee assistance program, or you have access to some type of counseling on campus, that's a good idea. You could ask someone you really trust for some suggestions of a therapist. You could go to Psychology Today and just try to find somebody with expertise around career issues. But I think that sometimes we carry a lot of baggage. The second thing is sometimes I think we are burned out and we just need some time away. And so sometimes I tell people after I see them in 6 months and they say, it's still not right for me, I ask them if they've taken a vacation. So you might think about that. And you know, it's possible that the love of science was beaten out of you and that there's another thing that's right for you. And again, that time away, the self-reflection, thinking about your resilience and wellness, all of that will help you find a way forward. So that's, please reach out if you want to talk about that a little bit more. How to minimize the damage caused by a bad mentorship relationship when we're searching for the next job. For example, how to avoid a bad recommendation letter. The answer to that is a large network of supportive mentors. Early in my career, I went to give a seminar at LSU, and I met a student there who really impressed me a lot. And he emailed me and said, I might like to do a postdoc with you. So I guess I impressed him a little bit as well. And I got 3 great letters and 1 lousy letter. That's why having multiple mentors matter. When you have multiple mentors, it's still an ouch when your primary supervisor or PI doesn't support you, but it's much less of an ouch when other people say, this person worked in a tough environment and they're amazing, and here's what I saw. So one big way of overcoming that is to have multiple mentors. If you have any tips for healing from a toxic relationship, and I talked a little bit about that. One of the things that I see is that when we're in a bad environment, we develop coping strategies like hiding or maladaptive strategies like drinking or a lot of numbing out in some way. And they work when we're in that environment. In some way, they feel like they're working. Maybe we know they're not healthy, but they're working. And sometimes I think we need somebody to help us let go of those maladaptive strategies. So again, my tip for making it out of a toxic environment and thriving in the next step is to put your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health first. Watch some of these workshops, commit to talking to a counselor, commit to journaling, commit to taking care of yourself, because we are really impacted by those toxic environments. And it's one of the reasons why I think that institutions have to do a better job of protecting students. I mean, shame on us that harassment has been going on for so long. I think many of us wish that we had been more vocal much earlier. And so do whatever you can to take care of yourself as you heal from that. Do I have recommendations for those who are entering the upcoming graduate school application cycle and identifying mentors that we can work successfully with over 6 years? I did a workshop here on transitioning successfully. Jordan, if you email me, I'll find the link for you. I talked about that in great length. I think that the mentoring video on that website goes over a little bit. Getting guidance from your program directors, getting guidance from current students. You have to learn to read between the lines a little bit. So program director might say, well, that's a pretty tough environment. You need to ask questions back, and you need to imagine that they're being pretty, they're like sending a message in that short comment. And so you'll need to talk to others, you'll need to observe carefully, and you need to understand that you won't likely break the mold. If other people are burned out, you will get burned out too. Not an N of one. If one person in a lab is unhappy, there are all kinds of reasons why. But if in general it seems that people are unhappy, you're going to be unhappy as well. How best should I ask for mentorship from someone who is not my PI? Does this have to be an explicit ask? That's great language, explicit ask. I tell people all the time, you have to be clear, right? You have to have an explicit ask. In this case, the best thing to do is to ask, can I come and talk with you about grad school? Can I come and talk with you about my thesis committee? Can I come and get your advice? You don't need to start at the beginning with, hey, will you be my mentor? But if you really connect and click, and you see that here's the possibility of somebody who could really support you through this training experience, at one point while you're talking with them, you can say, I want to thank you for your time. I really value your input. And I wonder if we could meet regularly in a more formalized mentoring relationship. But at the beginning, you just say, hey, I'd really like to talk with you. What about the complex mentor? Actually, I simplified everything totally here, right? Many people are a mix of all of those different things. They're often laissez-faire, but boy, a month before a grant is due, they become the dictator, right? We have to appreciate that whenever people are under stress, everything is harder. Whenever we're under stress, everything is harder. One of the things that worries me, people a lot say things like, how, when we go back to work after the pandemic, how do we get things set up quickly? I feel like what we need to be saying is, how do we thoughtfully get ready to re-engage? How do we set things up more slowly, more kindly? Because we're all going to be under extreme stress, and when people are under extreme stress, they don't always behave well. And so a complex mentor often changes under stress, and we want to keep that in mind. Are there unique aspects of mentorship that should be considered when mentoring students who are first generation? Yes, whether they're first generation undergrads or first generation graduate students, sometimes we need to be a lot more explicit in bringing up issues and questions. I think we should do that with everybody. Sometimes we look at someone and decide, well, they know exactly, they have more information and then we realize they don't. I mean, the more and more I learn from mentoring experiences where I feel like I let someone down, I realize it's because I think they can read my mind. And I think they're going to ask me every question they have. And I realize they're probably asking me every like third question they have. I do think that if we are mentoring students who are either early career or come from a background that may have less access to academic institutions and academic information, we want to be a little bit more vulnerable ourselves by putting issues on the table. Like, I remember I had imposter fears. Do you know what those are? Would you like to talk about them a little bit? That said, we want to put some vulnerabilities on the table, but we also have to be cautious and careful and remember that they come with extreme strengths. And we have to acknowledge those as well. Well, you've dealt with really tough times in the past. What are some strategies that work for you? So those are my thoughts about that. Are questions anonymous? I don't think anybody but me can see the questions, and I barely have time. I'm trying occasionally to use a first name, but I barely really have time to keep track of it, and I don't look at them afterward. And in my job, confidentiality is a hallmark feature. So even if I recognize your name, I'm not going to do anything with the question you asked. What if your mentor does not care about mentoring you? They just, you always get back, doesn't care about mentoring, will not give you suggestions about applications, does not keep themselves updated on published work, you never get constructive suggestions. So this is the non-mentor, the laissez-faire manager, somebody who themselves has really disconnected. There's a couple of answers, and one is multiple mentors. Is there someone else in the research group that can step up and provide some support, a more senior person, someone even a near peer who has some expertise and can provide help? Can you get if you're a grad student, can your committee provide some mentorship? If you're a postdoc, can a collaborator provide some mentorship? That's one way to enhance your mentoring network. Another way is to consider a co-mentor, actually formally going to that laissez-faire non-mentor and saying, I feel like I'm not as productive as I could be, and I wonder if you think it would be great, it would be okay, helpful, whatever word you want to use, for me to also work with so-and-so a little bit, so you can consider that. Sometimes, and if you're early in your experience and you realize you're not getting what you need and you can change, you might consider that. Those are some of the strategies that I would suggest. Could you walk us through an example of mentoring up? So here's one. My PI has not been able to give me timely feedback for about a year. He just let me know realistically he won't be able to get a paper we've been working on until the fall. Is there a mentoring up solution? So there's a nice example. So here's one suggestion I would offer, and I hate that there's no discussions here, and I'm going to ask you some questions about that. People are getting off the call, so maybe I'll do that really soon, because I want to have some discussion. I have some thoughts about how to do that. You might go and say, I appreciate that you're really busy and won't have time to get to the paper, and I understand that you have a lot of competing things to take care of. I'm getting close to the end and I really need the paper for my job applications fellowship, or this is really important work and we really want to get it shared. It's likely probably both of those. Is there another strategy we could take to move this along? Could I get advice from someone else in the group? Could I talk with a collaborator first to get some editing? Is there anything we can do to work on it in smaller parts and move this along? That would be a mentoring up solution. All right, so I hope that helps. I'm going to go ahead and just, for a moment, pause with questions. So I am happy to be offering these, but I'm very, very frustrated in that there's no chance for people to talk. And I think the learning happens from talking to each other, not from listening to me. So we tried to do small groups after the feedback talk, and a lot of people registered, but fewer people showed up. And And so it was both exciting to offer because people learned a lot from each other, but it was frustrating because it took a lot to set up and it cost money. So first of all, I just want to ask, if I offered a small group discussion, would you be interested? So if you can just vote yes or no to that right now. Well, okay, that's a lot of people who voted yes, but I don't know how many people have voted. Very small number of you. So it doesn't hurt my feelings to say no, just say no. I would rather see a fair number of people vote than not. All right, so I'm going to let it go a few more minutes and try to get up to about 30% voted. All right. So a fair number of you have voted and said yes, and my guess is some of the no's are people very busy. Some of the no's are people who have a pretty good relationship and they can take this material and go chat and expand their mentoring network. And a lot of the yeses are people in pretty tough environments. So thank you. The other question, I don't know how to close the poll. All right, I'll leave it open until it's done and I'll answer some more questions. I have one other question about that. All right, how do you know if you can trust a person you would like to be your mentor, but that person has a close relationship with your PI? That's a really thoughtful, important question for you to consider. So many of us have institutional responsibility to respect confidentiality, and we have institutional responsibility to support students. We also have institutional responsibility if someone is being harassed, to support them in reporting that harassment. And we wear sort of multiple hats around both protecting your privacy, but also protecting your safety. Some people respect boundaries much more than others. If someone is very, very close to your PI, you would want to meet and not share things right up front. You'd want to see how the relationship evolves and how it feels. And whether it feels that you can trust or not. So that's what I would say about that. Also, you can, sometimes people will say, I'm going to talk to so-and-so, and then they come back to me and say, you know, they said that they have a conflict of interest here. It just doesn't feel comfortable. I should get advice from someone else. So you would want to listen to that. For a PhD with 2 PIs, what are some useful strategies to try and have both on the same page? That's a great question. My students, I did a lot of the basic science work for scientists at the UNC Cystic Fibrosis Center. So they had a clinical mentor and a basic science mentor. And I swear that they played good cop, bad cop with us all the time. So sometimes they try to get us on the same page, but sometimes they'd use, you know, they would come and say, hey, Sharon, Jack said I should go to this, you know, this meeting. And I'd look at it and say, oh, it's expensive. But yeah, Jack said you should go. I think that you want to occasionally have meetings of the 3 of you. I think that you want to talk openly about when there are differences of opinion, saying it would be great if we all address these differences of opinion. I think those are 2 strategies on that. Also, every once in a while, you get along really great. One of them is a great mentor and the other is a bit of a toxic mentor or a non-mentor. Then you really want to listen and develop the relationship with the most supportive mentor and get their help in working around and managing up the other mentor. I feel it may be too late to develop a mentoring relationship with my PI. How can I change that? You know, maybe you're right. That's a little bit of a cognitive distortion, right? We always tend to see things negative. We want to protect ourselves from disappointment, so we assume it won't work. If you feel safe going and saying, hey, I had listened to this workshop on mentorship and I realized I've missed some opportunities for getting the most out of your knowledge of science and your knowledge about careers in science, and I wonder if we could have a little bit more of a conversation around that. And you might get a no, and you might get, wow, thank you for asking. You know, we did some small group discussions for PIs last week to talk about stress and coronavirus and taking care of students, and many of them expressed that they wish that they did a better job talking about personal things, that they wish that they could slow down and talk a little bit more about careers or learn more about careers. And maybe you'll be surprised and your PI will take you up on that invitation. The other thing is, think about it in small bits or little micro doses of mentoring. All right. So maybe you're not going to ever have this amazing, hallmark picture of a mentoring relationship, but maybe occasionally as you walk to a seminar, you'll chat a little bit about careers. Ask them a question. How did you decide what to do? Or how did you get advice when you were stuck in science? Think about some questions, get them talking about themselves. When mentors set high expectations for students, but they themselves do not follow their own expectations, what is the best way to deal with hypocrisy of a mentor? Well, I feel like we're all hypocrites at times. If it's an occasional thing, the best way is to let go of it. If it's an often thing, then that's an issue that needs to be discussed, and you need to go back to that. Can I let this go? Do I need to talk about this? Do I need to change my response to this, right? You really need to go through that model and decide whether the expectations are fair, whether the way you're being treated is fair, etc. Do you have recommendations on how to deal with a PI who does not understand or value mental health and work-life balance? In the resilience talk, I talk about this a lot. And I feel strongly that we all have to take ownership of our own mental health and work-life balance, and we all are responsible for our own health. And so we have to try within the situation to set boundaries. And if we really are in an environment where we can't set boundaries, we need to get some help setting those boundaries. So we need to go to an institutional leader that we trust and talk about the situation. I mean, it is life and death sometimes, right? We can work ourselves into such a difficult, exhausting space. I also think that we don't always have to share everything with our boss, right? And so sometimes we go and do things that we don't share. So I'm going to be out at 4 o'clock. We don't have to say why, right? And I appreciate that there's a power imbalance here, and it may not feel safe when I say that. And you're like saying, yeah, well, she's the boss. It's easy for her to say. But I have seen many, many students set some boundaries, and they've done it successfully. And I've seen students that really need institutional support to set those boundaries. So you have to find someone you trust and tell them what you're struggling with. What do you do if your PI gives you a lot of responsibilities that you're not experienced in? You have a couple of different things that you could do. One is that you could respond back and say, I'd love to do this, but I don't have any experience and I'm afraid I won't do it very well. How might I get the help I need to do that? You could find a mentor outside and say, hey, my boss just asked me to take care of this summer student and I don't know what to do, right? Is there any resources? Can I talk with you about it? You can ask other people in the group. So I think it's letting your PI know. So being assertive with your PI, I'd love to do that, but I'm not sure I know how to. It's using institutional resources to get the skills. It's using your broader mentoring network to get some skills. It's also, sometimes you might respond back and say, I don't know how to do that, but I'm excited to learn on my own, but I just want to let you know there might be a learning curve, right? And actually somebody in my office did that with me recently. They're like, I'd love to do this, but I don't know how. And I really appreciated it. So I've changed my expectations of the time. And, it was a really nice example of managing up. My PI recently became department chair, so he doesn't have much time for me or other grad students. He tries to make time, but is trying to balance many commitments. I've tried to find alternate mentors, but there are certain things I really need from him. I think that the best outcome on this one would be an honest conversation. Send an email that says, I really appreciate how busy you are now, and I really want to support you in taking care of all the different things you need to take care of. I'm relying on other input from other people for some things, but I really need input from you about other things. Could we meet to talk about it? And maybe you'll get on the calendar for every 10 days and you'll go in incredibly prepared, right, with an agenda, and suddenly you'll get your needs met. So I think that it's a really worthwhile conversation to have. I agree, as an international student, when I changed my lab after 1.5 years, my committee members were a great support. Speak with them, they're in your corner. Thank you for sharing that. I think that when the system works, it's just such a inspiring thing, right? You were brave and vulnerable and talked to people, and they stepped up to the plate and helped you. And that's when science really works. You mentioned that we should keep in mind what we have to offer to a mentoring relationship with an outside mentor. What are some things that a mentee has to offer to a potential outside mentor? I've gotten feedback on programs from people who've come to talk with me. Every once in a while, we talk about something sort of outside of the workspace, and they have an idea or they send me a link. I love to cook, and I might mention that, and it turns out that the mentee I'm talking to loves to cook as well, and they send me a recipe, all kinds of things. And sometimes I just get a chance to connect with somebody at a different career level who comes from a different perspective than me, and I get to learn about them and their culture, something important to them. Sometimes it's just the feeling of giving back, right? I'm paying it forward. Someone helped me, and now I'm helping them. So all kinds of things that you give. Should we disclose to our mentor if we are seeking counseling about stresses and things in the lab? I think the answer depends on your relationship with your PI. It depends on that list, right? That figure I had with the people all lined up, all the way from great mentor to tour mentor. We have a right to privacy, and we can share or not share. I think sometimes it helps for PIs to know what's happening. They don't need all of the details, but they might need to know that you're really stressed, and that you'd like to leave early every Tuesday to go see a counselor. But if you don't feel safe, then you should not share that. It is likely better to find someone on campus that you trust where you can talk that through, but it's not a yes or a no. It's a yes, maybe, no, maybe, depending on the relationship. I do wish that all of us were really open about our health and wellness and mental health. I think that starts from the top. And I think that there are many people like me who have to do a better job of modeling good behavior, right? Of modeling wellness. You know, we're doing this wellness challenge. You should get on Twitter and find it. It's the NIH OITE Wellness Challenge. And Francis Collins posted, you know, I sent him an email and he said, well, of course. And he wrote a beautiful blog post actually about his own wellness practice. I think we need role models. So my hope is that if you talk to your PIs about wellness, they'll acknowledge that they also wish they could take care of themselves more. The wellness advisors who run the PI groups for me tell me that the PIs wish that they had ways you know, to learn to take care of themselves. I mean, many of us grew up in the generation of science where we didn't talk about anything but science, and we were told to suffer to be in science. How do you talk about very uncomfortable topics like how your race and racial biases impact mentoring relationships? The way to do that is to make sure that you've processed your emotions around that, not to do that discussion from a position of anger, but to come back later and say how important it is to talk about something that's difficult for you. You know, one of the strategies I've learned through mental health counseling is if something's too hard to talk about that it's hard to talk about. And so to go and say to your mentor, I really value our relationship and I value the group and I want to do well here. And there's something difficult to talk with you about some microaggressions I've experienced or some racial biases that are impacting me. And that's really difficult. And I hope we can have a good discussion. That would be a good start. Getting some support in advance if there's a student group, an affinity group where you can talk about it. If you have a mentor, whether they're in the same identity social group or not, but you feel that you can really talk with them about it, practice with them first. Those are some strategies for that. How do you get people other than your PI interested in becoming your mentor, or for what reasons are any interest would people spend time mentoring and coaching you? Because you are the future, because we love talking to people with new ideas and new energies, because we're a part of the community of science and we want to cultivate the community of science, because maybe we mentor you in patch clamping, but you mentor us a little bit in social media, or you use cell culture, and we'd love to hear a little bit about that. We mentor because it feels good. We mentor because we get things out of it. We mentor because it's the moral and ethical thing to do. And we mentor you so that you mentor others in the future. The slides on feedback, you just need to email me. There's nothing I can do about other slides, but if you email me, I'll shoot you all the slide decks that you want. I think I did that one already. I just moved to the US as a first-year postdoc. Given the current COVID situation, we're not able to meet people personally. How efficient is it to email someone for being a mentor if we can't meet personally? I think that, first of all, let me just acknowledge how hard it must be to have moved here in the middle of all of this. I feel that I have an extreme amount of privilege, and I find this really difficult. So I can only imagine how it feels for somebody who just recently got here. This is a good time to email people to say you're new and that you would really benefit from a chance to talk a little bit. This is a good time. Reach out. If you're at NIH, reach out to me and I'll make sure that you're on our listservs. If you're at another institution, find the director of the postdoc office there or the graduate program there. If you're, look at the National Postdoc Association, go to professional society web pages, find activities to do. Find workshops, hear people give a talk, come to the career symposium. It's a little early maybe to think about careers, but maybe in a panel you'll hear something interesting, right? If that doesn't feel right, find some other program that would be good. But reaching out to start to find support now would be a great idea. Also, peer mentors right now would really help. So is there a listserv for international students? Is there a group for international students? And so those are some ideas of ways that I would do that. I would love to have more and better mentorship relationships. I'm not sure I have specific questions or agenda items. I wonder if I don't know what I don't know. That's very good insight. We all don't know what we don't know. And that's pretty common. Especially so students will think, well, now I'm 1 year out, now I need career mentorship, or I'm hit a bump in my science, now I need mentorship. And so we tend to think about it as I have a need, so let me go out and do it. And really what we want is to be a little bit proactive. So the first thing to do is to sit a little bit and think about all the different skill sets you want to develop and which ones you're developing, and pick something that you want to start developing. For grad students and postdocs, understanding career exploration is important all the way from the beginning. You don't want to wait till the end. So you could try to find a career mentor. You could just start with your career office and meet with somebody there to just say, hey, I'm just at the beginning, but I wonder what you think people should do, to explore careers at such an early stage. Maybe right now you think, I'd love to learn a little bit about epidemiology or coronavirus, or I realize as I've been sitting at home that learning a little bit of computer programming is a good idea. So get a mentor around that. That will start to illustrate to you what you don't know and what you want mentorship about. Do you think that the current resources are enough to protect students and postdocs from their PIs? No. I think that as a scientific community, the leadership at each institution and nationally and internationally needs to continue having hard discussions about making the mentoring environment and work environment as welcoming as possible. We need to continue developing policies around harassment and how to deal with harassment. We need to develop proactive trainings to make our environments more welcoming to people of color, to students of different abilities, to LGBTQ individuals. We need to be welcoming the visiting fellows community, especially warmly right now. We need to be developing programs that protect everyone, that provide training for faculty, that provide support systems for faculty so that they can do a better job. We need to develop ways of making sure that people who don't treat students well don't keep getting more and more students. We have a lot to do. That's me speaking as an individual. I think many people share my sentiment that we have more to do. Students also need to help support each other by being more honest about why they left a lab, right? Somebody says, oh, you worked with so-and-so, why'd you leave? And you say, oh, it was a bad fit, but really they yelled all the time and you hated it. Maybe you should be honest and say, well, to be honest, the environment was really harsh. So I think students have some responsibility, but the people who have the most responsibility are the leadership. And I wish that we could do better by all of you. How to be assertive in communication. I'm going to encourage you to watch the assertive communication talk. There's several questions about how to be more assertive and how to manage conflicts. And there are talks in all of that that are already up and available. I feel like the science culture has moved away from mentoring and training, and the emphasis is on output, and it feels like we are just hands at a bench. How do we go about changing the culture? You know, I sometimes say to students, you're not hands with pipettes or keyboards, you're whole people. And I actually say that to PIs all the time. You know, there are people who work with you. So you're right that I wonder if we sometimes make you feel like you're just hands at a bench. So we go about changing that culture by choosing a lab where we are seen as people. You know, we offered a webinar for faculty on supporting your students through the coronavirus pandemic, and there were a lot of people who watched it. And I bet there were a lot of people who just hit delete and said, why would I do that? We change the culture of science by voting with our feet and going to labs that are really good environments, where the PI is a good mentor, where the PI acknowledges their blind spots and helps you find other mentors. And there are people like that, many people like that. And we change the culture of science by rewarding those people, by going to those labs, by celebrating the labs that are really positive environments. The data actually they show us that that toxic environments not only are bad for mental health, but they're not good for science either. So I think we all have to do our part by getting all the training we can to be good mentors, by practicing self-care and taking care of ourselves, by letting institutional officials know about problems, by protecting ourselves by joining good environments. It's a whole lot of things to change a culture. Does the OITE provide counseling services for postdocs who find themselves in difficult lab environments? We have a wellness support team and discussion groups around wellness and resilience and difficult environments for trainees at NIH. We do not have the capability to provide services to people outside NIH, although we are trying through these workshops to be as available as possible. And the small group discussions that I am considering holding would be a chance for you to at least strategize and get some support. But generally, students at other institutions should find the OITE equivalent at that institution. And you can reach out to me if you're at NIH. you can reach out to me. If not, and I can help put you in touch or help you find people uh, at your institution. What if you contact a potential mentor but do not hear back from them? How do you deal with that? Well, you try a second time, because I don't answer every email. I should. So if you email me and I don't answer, you could assume, oh, Sharon doesn't care, and never do it again. Or you could think, maybe Sharon was busy. Let me ping her again. So I suggest you ping people one more time. If they never answer, eventually you have to give up, but you should ping once or twice. If they're at your campus and we're back to being able to talk to people in public, you might stop them at a seminar. Hey, I emailed you. I was hoping we could get together. You might drop by their office, but right now I suggest pinging again and then moving on. Any suggestions with managing up to coax collaborators into motion? You're right, there's a whole, I just talked about managing your PI, but it's the same thing. And everything I talked about is the same. Think about their style. Think about, maybe this collaboration is way more important to you than it is to them, right? And so you might, just like the advice about the trainee whose PI just became a department chair, you might want to reach out and say, I appreciate you're probably busy and have a lot of competing needs. This project is important to me. Is there any way I can help to move it along some? And you're not responsible for their response, but at least you feel good that you advocated for yourself. And eventually you might have to realize they're not going to get this done. Should I mentor up if my advisor overall is pretty okay mentor, his focus is always on another project rather than the one my thesis is a part of? That's a great reason to manage up. It's generally a good person, and they clearly are loving some other science a little bit more than yours. And I have to say, I feel a personal ouch about that. I think I did that some when I ran a lab, and the honest truth is I think I sometimes do it now in my job in the OITE. There are just some things I'm totally excited about and other things that I've gotten on a back burner. I think having a discussion about that is really important. Hey, I really value our mentoring relationship. It's been a good experience. I'm excited about wrapping up. I want to talk with you about this impression that I have that maybe my project isn't that exciting right now. Is there something I can do to get a little bit more feedback? And you might get a great answer. And that's a great example of managing up. Yesterday, a staff member of mine at the end of a group call said, hey, can we talk for a few minutes? And she said, I just have this feeling that there's something going on, a little bit of an issue about, and she filled in the blank. And I paused for a moment and, we had a great discussion about it. So it might be really good to bring that up. What about a chameleon mentor, someone who is so skilled that they're abusive when individuals are alone or in their small lab group, but outside the lab, they are loved by all faculty? That is an incredibly difficult situation, that passive aggressive, outwardly charming, difficult person. So I actually wanted to recommend a book. It's called Working for You Isn't Working for Me. And it talks a lot about working with toxic advisors and bosses. The examples come from the business world. They don't totally resonate with scientists, but I think it might help a little bit. The honest truth is we have to try to find the institutional official most responsible for setting aside whatever impression they have and acting on input. And that could be the director of the graduate program, the head of if you're on a T32, the head of the T32 grant. It could be the department chair. You'll want to be really cautious as you talk to people, but it's really important to bring up what happens in the lab and what your personal experience is. And you'll want to get some advice from that as you move forward. But again, it comes down to, you can do nothing, try to change it, or leave the environment. And to decide which of those to do means to really carefully consider where you're at, what your options are, etc. You should have had an I don't know option. I'm not sure what you mean about that, but if you write some more, I will try to answer. So somebody gave me feedback. They must have done the other small group discussion. So I'm going to pause for a moment. There is another poll. So I would like to try another set of small groups, but I'm thinking people didn't turn up, registered and didn't show up, maybe because the times were bad. And so if you could just let me know, don't fill this out if you're not going to come. But if you really want a discussion, then please let me know which of these times is best for you. But thank you for that feedback. I also feel that holding groups more regularly, maybe with the same people and one of the wellness advisors, would be really positive, and I will consider that. The honest truth is my mandate is to do things like this at NIH, and I'm trying to wrap my head around ways to provide services a little bit more broadly. But if you would, the person who emailed that, if you want, or who put that comment in, if you want to reach out to me just to talk about how that might look, I would be happy to talk with you about it. I did that one already. The small group discussions would be on the talk. So it would be that you would meet with 10 or 12 other people about what mentors do I have, what do I like about my mentor, my PI, what don't I like, what do I need to do about it, what have I tried. It would be a chance to reflect on this material. Okay, so that's what it would be. Any advice for PhD students being mentored by MDs? Multiple mentors, and acknowledging the benefits of it. And I didn't talk about that enough. The honest truth is that we should always start by saying, so what's good about this relationship? Sometimes people say to me nothing, and then as they reflect on it, they're like, well, I've learned a lot of assertiveness. I've learned how to take care of myself. I've learned how to set boundaries. I don't want that to be your only positives, okay? I would really like to see other things, but I think that the thing that you get out of an MD mentor is a chance to see some clinical things and to talk to somebody who has a really different mindset. But you need multiple mentors, and your committee needs to have a bunch of PhDs, and you need to use them beyond the 1 time or 2 times a year you have a committee meeting. You need to really build your mentoring network. How do you handle a hierarchy struggle? There's a conflict with your direct supervisor is not your PI. It's important to actually go to your PI and let them know what's going on, but to do it in a professional way. I have to say, you know, I talked about hot buttons. One of my hot buttons is when there's a big negative issue going on in my office and nobody tells me that people are arguing in the moment, because I think maybe with mediated discussion, maybe with some support to each group, maybe with some small changes, we could work this out. And so it's important to go to your PI, not in a tattletale kind of way. So you want to work first to deal with your emotions about it. You want to go when you're feeling pretty calm and able to have a discussion where you can see both their side and your side and articulate both. But one of the best ways of dealing with that is by having a conversation. The other is to think, can I talk directly with the person who's my direct supervisor, who's not my PI? Could I go to them and suggest we go together? Another resource I didn't talk about a lot are that there's something at most institutions called the Ombudsman, and that's a place where people are experts in negotiation, and they often serve as a mediator. We don't, I think, generally shouldn't go first to a mediated discussion. We might want to try ourselves first. So I would say 2 things: to have an open conversation with your PI. I want to share something getting in the way of my success and get your advice about how I might move forward, but also directly with that person and say, hey, I feel like we're having some struggles and I'd like to try to work it out. Yeah, somebody here is saying, you know, there are times when a PI is on their best behavior, you rotate, you stay a while, and then suddenly their true colors show, and it would be difficult to leave. You know, I've seen people leave after a couple of years, and I'm not advocating for that. I think that sometimes the situation is so bad that we have to really face what are our options. My mental health is not good. My physical health is not good. I'm hating science. Every day I get up and I don't want to come to work, and we have to sit and face that. And sometimes, I mean, it's a question of what is a decent amount of time. It isn't how much time you've put in, it's sometimes how much time you have left and what will happen if you stay. Will you leave with no papers, right? And so the other thing that I would encourage people to do about that, and you can't run the clock back, but sometimes people don't show their totally true colors, but there's a lot of warning signs, and people say that to me a lot. I realize now I saw warning signs. So if you have a bad feeling about work, if Sunday night is a stressful time for you, if the day you have to present at lab meeting, I mean, there should be some healthy, good stress, but if you're miserable because you know you're going to be treated lousy, pay attention to those warning signs. So my advice, even if you've been there a while, is sort of still the same, that you have to sort of tackle it with the most trusted people that you can find. You know, sometimes I get really frustrated answering the questions because I feel like there is no magic answer to any of this. But I think the answer is that we really do have a right to be happy, and that sometimes we don't take action because we fear the outcome, but we never ask ourselves, well, what is the consequence of inaction? And sometimes we realize that trying to change it is better than doing nothing. That said, I have to acknowledge there is no easy answer for when you're in a really toxic environment. I've started working with my group in the midst of the pandemic. I'm wondering how best to connect with the PI and group members virtually. Everything feels very unnatural right now. I might email each of them or email the whole group separate maybe from the PI and say, I'm new and I feel like I don't have a great chance to get to know you. I wonder if I could invite each of you for a virtual cup of coffee. If the lab has a lab meeting, make sure to go and try to ask some questions, reach out to the PI and say, I want to use this quarantine time productively. Could we meet and talk about some things that I might do? And so I would invite people for some virtual meetings. I'm considering joining the lab of a very new PI. There's no alumni. How would I ask about their mentoring style? I'm worried about whether or not the PI will prioritize mentoring over lab productivity. It's always a hard thing with a new person. There's some beauty to being one of the new people. You get to watch them start up the lab. They're often around and working, but the negative is they're learning how to mentor and they're learning how to balance and juggle, and there's some risk to it. So you can see if they mentored people when they were a postdoc and try to talk to some of them. You can ask them what they feel about you working with them, but also talking to other people who might be a little bit more senior. You need to get a sense of how they respond to questions about mentoring. But I think that there's always a risk when you can't get a lot of data, but the payoff of joining a new person's lab is that you get to see a whole lot. And sometimes, you know, it's worth the risk. Here's one about dual mentorship with 2 PIs for PhD training. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't cover that in this workshop. I cover it in a workshop about writing thesis proposals. I don't know why I put it there and not here. You know, there's no doubt that there's this odd thing that you can have one-on-one meetings with each of them. Then there's 3-way meetings with both of them, but and which one they prefer and which one you prefer might be really different. And I think sometimes that's because they start debating with each other and you sort of think you're not there, or, you know, your needs aren't being met. So I think that this is one where you have to try to make a win-win. And maybe during those 3-way meetings, you practice speaking up a little bit. You learn from watching them. Maybe you get some ideas, but you will definitely have to step up a little bit. But then you're going to need to meet individually if not all of your needs were met. And so I think that it's important to do both when that happens. I've tried to improve my relationship with my PI. I don't plan to leave because I think it's okay, but my PI is honestly a person who is hard to trust and respect, takes advantage of power, as the only American in the lab, he calls assertiveness aggression. How can I avoid the toxicity he gives out in lab meetings? So I think here's somebody who has thought through options and decided to stay. So the thing to do is, and that book, Working for You, Is It Working for Me? It talks about getting your needs met other ways. So if lab meeting is toxic for you, you need to address that by A, taking care of yourself before lab meeting, B, maybe telling yourself, oh, I'm going to go into lab meeting and it's going to be a bit toxic. I like to imagine when I'm going into an intense meeting that I have my umbrella, my rain boots, my rain hat. It's like I'm preparing to weather a storm. I psych myself into accepting it is the way it is, and I tell myself I'm going to be okay. And what I need afterward is something calm. So I might call home and chat with my wife. Here, I've noticed that after an intense meeting, I'll go seek out the dog. Maybe it's a walk, it's a run. Maybe it's some of your positive supercharged music, but you come up with a plan for dealing with that negative atmosphere. And then you get your needs met another way. So maybe you're never going to get great strategizing at lab meetings, so you form a small group of a special interest group where people strategize about data. And that book, Working for Me Isn't Working for You, talks a lot about ways to do that. And I think it's really very, very good. How do you approach a PI that expects you to manage aspects of the lab unrelated to your thesis project to a level that hinders your progress on your thesis? So first of all, ask yourself, am I learning something? Is there a benefit? I think as a postdoc, I handled lots and lots of management issues in my lab. I handled a lot of the undergraduates, and at times I felt really put upon, but now I realize that I learned an incredible amount of management skills, incredible amount of useful skills that helped me when I ran my lab. So I, in hindsight, see it a little bit more as a trade-off. So the first question is, ask yourself, is something positive coming out of this? And then if the answer is yes, then good. If the answer is yes, but it's too much, then you have to have a discussion with your PI. And it starts with, I'm really glad you trust me to deal with these things, and I want to be a good lab citizen. And I'm happy to do some things. And I'm also worried about how much it's getting in the way. And maybe you have a suggestion to offer. Can we rotate people who clean the chemical room? Can we take turns in ordering? Is there a way an undergraduate could help me? And so I would encourage you to think about it from having a conversation that needs to be had. And if you need advice on how to do that, somebody in your graduate office or postdoc office might be able to strategize with you. There might be a conflict, difficult conversations workshop. The assertiveness and feedback workshops might have some useful resources for you. I'm in a very toxic, abusive postdoc mentor-mentee relationship for a year. The support system at my university says it's time to file a mistreatment report, which I'm afraid of. Can this potentially create a problem of becoming considered a troublemaker? And potential employers will avoid considering me for hires. So I think if multiple people that you respect are advising you to file a report, as scary as it is, do your best to understand the system and the protections of the system and go ahead and file the report. And I can't say that without really knowing your situation, so I'm talking hypothetically. But if there are people that you really trust who are telling you that, ask them how they can help assure your safety. In the anti-harassment program at NIH, we talk explicitly about letters of recommendation and how we will help people through that. And I have to say that I've seen students in horrific situations who filed a report and who landed on their feet in new jobs that they love. And they are some of the most inspiring people to me. And so I guess I hope that for you. I think a part of why they landed on their feet is they found institutional officials they really trusted. They asked a lot of hard questions about the process and about ways that they would be protected. They found multiple mentors. Some had already and used those. Some worked to cultivate other relationships. And most importantly, they took care of themselves. And in some of the most toxic situations, that meant counseling for a long time to talk through the betrayal and the disappointment. And so I'm really, really sorry that that happened to you, or is happening to you. And I hope that you can find a way to make a report and be protected through the experience. I guess I'll say that leadership in science, we're aware that there are really hostile environments. We're aware that many women face gender discrimination and sexual harassment, as do men, but still many, many more women when we look at the data. And we're aware that science has to protect people who find themselves in these kinds of situations. My PI and my day-to-day supervisor are in different labs. I deal with each of them somewhat independently. I don't work well with my day-to-day supervisor. Should my PI be made aware of that? If you feel that it's getting in the way, it would be good. If you feel your PI could help and give some strategy and advice, it would be good to talk about. I think that that's really in your control to decide, is this relevant and worth discussing? Generally, I think if you have a PI that's supportive and tends to listen, being open and asking for guidance is a good thing. You don't want to go in a tattletale kind of way. You don't want to go in a complaining way, but to say, hey, I'm struggling a bit with this. Could you give me some perspective might happen. Just sharing my experience. I landed in a toxic lab. However, one of my colleagues recommended talking to the dean and my lab was changed. That shaped my career. I realized the importance of speaking up. Thank you for sharing that. In the graduate school talk I give, I end by saying that changing labs is often way better than staying and suffering. In fact, I go on to say, I think it's almost always or nearly always. There are times when it's so close to the end that I say, let's give you all the support we can and get you through this. But I think often it's such a feeling of I took care of myself for talking to people. When we hide, that means we feel shame. And there's nothing to be ashamed of if somebody else is behaving poorly, right? That's on them, not on you. And so I'm so glad to hear that it worked out. So I am getting very, very, well, it's 4:30. I am not quite done yet. So I'll answer a couple more. Does OITE offer sessions related to the DISC assessment? We do not use the DISC. We use the Myers-Briggs type indicator. That's just our preference, but we talk a lot about mentor-mentee relationships from that perspective. It's called Workplace Dynamics 1, and I think we actually will be offering it online sometime soon. The discussion sessions that we do are confidential. There are no faculty there. The wellness advisors that run them talk about confidentiality at the beginning. The honest truth is that since you're all from all kinds of institutions, it may be that nobody in that group even knows you. And I know that's both hard because there's no trust when you don't know people, but there is some sort of safety in the fact that I'm talking to a random set of graduate students. The wellness advisors report back to me, never with a name, whether that's just an NIH group or a mixed group, never with a name, but sometimes they tell me here's a general theme for you to think about. So it would be confidential. I believe that limited NIH research funding leads to high competition. Together with university expectations, it creates a very stressful environment. I agree. I mean, I think that I'm in the intramural side. I don't work on grant policy, but I think everyone at grant policy would agree that we wished we had much more money to give out. There are many, many deserving grants that don't get funded. There are many competing interests. in the federal government, and a lot of things that impact funding levels. And if you have a chance to advocate for the importance of research funding, do so. I guess I also would add that there are lots of other things that need funding, and sometimes I think, boy, I wish early childhood education would have more funding. I wish more drug prevention programs would have more funding. So I think we have to appreciate that it's just there's a lot of competing needs. That said, NIH, advocating for NIH is always a good thing. And I think it's on universities and the NIH and leadership in general, all of us, to learn how to work in stressful environments, to provide the support so that PIs can feel supported as they work through that really competitive environment. I love the NIH Overdrive library. Is it possible to get some of these book recommendations? I don't actually know where that is, so just send me an email, okay? We have our OITE library is already housed in the NIH library archives. So go ahead and email me, Brittany, and I'll check on that. Sometimes we have job responsibilities, so having these discussions before 4 is sometimes hard. I know. I will try to do some of them later. Thank you. I see that a lot of people said 4 to 6. So clearly I messed up in running any in the morning. I'm not going to run any in the morning, and maybe I'm going to run a few of them that go a little bit later. How does one regain confidence after being excluded from meaningful work because of favoritism in the group? You know, the way we overcome all hard experiences and regain confidence is by taking care of the underlying sadness and grief and disappointment and shock of all of that. And that means journaling and support groups and counseling and taking care of ourselves. And I know that's frustrating to hear people say, can't you give me something easier than that? And I wish there was something easier than that. And as someone who struggled for many, many, many years as a result of I had great mentors in both grad school and postdoc, but I had a really hard time starting college and navigating through college and issues with my family. And I tried to ignore them for decades. And I finally said, okay, I'm going to rip this Band-Aid off and address these things. So as somebody who tried to ignore the fact that we have to deal with our emotions if we want to heal from things, I guess I have to say I don't see a way around it. The only way to deal with all of that is through it. And so it takes work and it takes effort, and we have so much stigma around mental health, and we don't have the best insurance parity around mental health. Find resources and use them. And if you need to ask for a sliding scale, or you need to find someone who will work with you about finances, make an effort to do that. Each of you is valuable and important, and you need to invest in you. I worked for a handful of years before starting grad school. I had an extremely toxic supervisor, which still affects how comfortable I feel reaching out for help. Yeah, and so I guess I'll say the same thing, that we have to work through and find a way to trust people, and we're worth it, because there are great mentors out there, and you want to find yourself, you don't want to self-sabotage your relationships. And so reach out to someone who can help you find a strategy for moving forward and dealing with that. I was in a toxic lab for about a year and was running the lab and had a drop in manuscript prep. I'm wondering when to apply for a K and how I might deal with all of this. You know, there's no one way to reach an end goal. There are multiple ways. And so I think the thing to do is to focus on being as productive as you can now. And I have seen people who don't have any publications from a toxic lab. I've seen them land on their feet. One of the reasons why I like to give this talk early and often at NIH is so that people change labs earlier rather than later. Because if you're in a lab 2 years and don't have a paper, it's not the same as if you're in a lab 5 years and don't have a paper. And I need to be realistic and say, you know, it's easy to say, just move on. It's hard, and there are consequences, and not having papers can impact job searches. But I do find that people who dealt with really toxic situations and moved on and landed in a good environment, by working clearly with that new mentor and other mentors to address the situation, they often get exactly where they want to go career-wise. They just get there through a little bit of a different pathway, or even a dramatically different pathway. And sometimes I will, when I write a letter from, like I wrote, somebody joined my lab after a really toxic environment, and I thought they were terrific and that toxic time shouldn't be held against them. And I addressed it in my letter in a really politically smart way, but I went ahead and addressed it. Why do mentors agree to help mentees? What do they get out of it? We get out of it the ability to talk to really talented people like you and like all the people on this webinar who ask such thoughtful and good questions. You make me feel optimistic about the future. And so we mentor for that reason. We mentor because we feel responsible. We mentor because people helped us. And so I think that, oh, there's one other question going back to the, I'm thinking about making a report. How do you explain to another potential employer that you're leaving your current postdoc after a year, other than the frank answer that you've been abused? So if you're finding a new position right there in the moment, what you do is say, it was a very difficult environment. I got input from many people at the organization who advised me to move on, and you don't go into the details. You try to be as professional as possible, and you get someone you really trust to read that email before you send it, and you practice in your career office, if you have one, or with a mentor, you practice how you're going to answer when people say, well, what really happened? Okay. And the last email is a thank you. So I mean, the last question is a thank you. I have cleared the box. It is 4:43, and I am certain that I am late for something that I should have been at. But I feel like this was really important, and so I decided to clear the question box. And there are 131 of you who stayed on the call. So you are all heroic, because I've been talking now at you for almost 3 hours. So let's wrap up and log off. And to all the people typing in, thank you. First of all, you're welcome, but second of all, thank you. The future of science is all of you. It's not me and my generation. And in some ways, we left you some messes to deal with. And I do really feel that you will be the generation that makes science a more welcoming and positive environment. You are more diverse than we are in every way. You care about this kind of material so much so that you'll sit on a call for this long, and so many of you have logged into many of them. So you make me feel very optimistic for the future. There aren't that many silver linings in this pandemic experience. But getting to know so many of you, even remotely, has been one of the silver linings. And I look forward to the day that we're at a meeting together and you stop me and say, hey, I heard a few of those workshops during that awful time. So thank you all very, very much. If you're at NIH, reach out. If you're not at NIH and it would be helpful, reach out and email me a second time when I don't answer, okay? Because I'm really busy these days. So thank you all, and wash your hands and stay at home and be well, and do something to take care of yourself today, and do something to be nice to others today. Thank you, everyone.